Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to paint this pomegranate still life because they are in season right now. And if you like this time lapse, you can find the real-time version of this tutorial up in Critique Club. I'll have a link in the video description so you can find it. I'm starting off with some water-mixable oil paints, and I was going to experiment with some solvent-free gel, but it didn't really work out for me too well. It actually did not, it wasn't compatible with my paint, so just disregard that little puddle of clear gel you see in the center of my palette. I'm using a small round Mimic Hog brush to sketch in my scene, and by the way, the brushes, the paints, they're all from my signature set over at Jerry's Artorama. It's the Lucas Berlin set, and all of my signature sets are back in stock. So if you were hoping to snag one of those for the holidays, you are in luck. So I'll have links to that as well in the video description. You could also sketch on with oil pastels. Even if you're using a water mixable oil, it will meld into the oil pastels if you want to sketch with those. So whatever is more convenient for you. I figured just a small brush and thinning down the paint with some water so that it would be really flowy and easy to sketch with would work just fine. Keep in mind, this is going to mix in with your upper layers of paint, and we're going to paint this pretty much all in one go. So, so you don't really have to worry about how much well, you do have to worry a little bit how much you're thinning it. You don't want to thin paint more than 30%. But if you are just sketching out with some thinned down paint, you're going to be fine. It's gonna mix in with those thicker layers of paint, and it's not going to cause a problem. The time you really need to worry about how much you add to your paint is when you're doing layer upon layer. And just want to get the basic layout. Now the bowl, or the plate rather, that I put the pomegranates on is this long oval plate, and it looks so awkward that I eventually had to change it to a round plate because I just couldn't get it to look natural. I am taking some cad yellow and some white, and I am putting in a nice yellow background. I thought that was kind of cheerful, and there was going to be so much red in this painting with the pomegranate and the little pinkish, like clear pinkish cup that I decided to put some seeds in, that I just wanted a little bit of contrast. I also like how I can kind of pull out some of those reds and let it kind of almost glow into the background a bit. You can smooth out your background as much as you want. I like a little bit of texture. I like to see some brush strokes here and there, but that's completely up to you how much you want. Then I took some phthalo green, also called Viridian hue sometimes, depending on the brand of paint you're using, and I added that to the tabletop area. So basically, I have my still life set up in front of me on a piece of white paper, and I decided that I wanted to give it a little more color, and having a green, like a nice pastel green in there, was going to really make my red seem extra vibrant, so I decided to go with that. Now, because the cup that's going to have the pomegranate seeds is transparent, I want to make sure I get some of those background colors into the cup before I go and paint the seeds in there. And when you're painting with oils, I find it to be very almost like you're sculpting, because you get to transform objects really easily. You can scooch an edge in, you can pull an edge out, you can really keep altering until you get just what you want. I mean, you're going to see that with the plate. The plate gets several reconfigurations before we're done here. But that's kind of the fun of painting with oils. I feel like it's constantly malleable, and you can keep moving it and pushing it and nudging it until you get it just the way you want. I did take a little bit of burnt umber there at the bottom and add that for some shadow, and just kind of pulled it up into the background. And there you can see my reference photo on screen, so you can get kind of an idea of how I have this set up. And I tried to take a picture as close as I could from where I was sitting and looking at the scene. It's so funny, when you're taking a picture, I just use my phone usually. I can bring the phone up to my face, take the picture, and it will look different in the screen than where I'm sitting looking at it. It's so funny how cameras can distort things. So it's good to take a picture when you're working on a still life that could spoil, like fruit or flowers or whatnot. But I would say trust your drawing, because you may find it changes a little bit. Now here I'm trying to get the flutes on the edge of that plate that I can see, and I can see it more in real life obviously than my photograph. But I kind of like that actually. Now that I'm looking back at it, I kind of I kind of wish I had left it like that because it's kind of interesting, but it just doesn't look like it's sitting square on the table. And I had to tip the painting up because I'm like, man, it just doesn't look right. And it was just kind of driving me bananas. And I kept futzing with it, and it was definitely frustrating. I think I may have to put that plate in another still life and look at it again, try it again, because it looks weird in the photo too. To be honest, when I look at the photo, it looks strange. But hey, that's one of the great things about painting from a still life that you set up yourself is you can actually pick up and examine an object. And like I mentioned, oil paint's very forgivable, and you can just wipe something out that you don't like and put it back in and have another go, like I did there. Plate? What plate? You can make the plate disappear. Nobody has to know. You can just completely change your mind. Of course, I did end up putting a plate in there, but I had to honestly get rid of everything I had because it was confusing me more than it was helping me. So never be too precious about your painting that you're afraid to start over or that you're afraid to change something drastically. Now, of course, that wouldn't be as easy to do in watercolor or in marker or something that's transparent like that. But when you've got something opaque like gouache, acrylics, oil paints, you can definitely keep taking a crack at it until you get it right. So don't be afraid. If you know it's inaccurate, just try again, get back on the bike. It's, you might get frustrated. If you get frustrated, take a break and then come back and look at it with fresh eyes. And that's going to help you a lot too. So as you can see, I decided to go back in with more of a round plate instead of the kind of ovally plate that I have there, and I decided that that's the way I was gonna keep this one. And I decided I would throw some shadows in while I was at it. Now, one of the things that was kind of too bad about my photograph is that the little dessert cup left a very interesting shadow that almost looked like a crown, and you can see that in my painting, but it's really tough to see on the photograph there, up in the corner, but it left such an interesting pattern on the table that I had to keep it. I'm like, I just think that is such an interesting element that I really wanted to accentuate it. Now, also, something to keep in mind when you're painting a still life, especially if you're setting it up at home, you're going to have competing light sources. Unless you're setting up in a room where you can have the still life kind of isolated and just put a really strong light on it, you're probably going to have light coming in from the window. You're going to have light coming from overhead lights. You might have light from a side lamp. So it is quite possible that you're going to have highlights and reflections and shadows that don't completely agree with each other. So I encourage you to really observe and paint what you see, because it'll give you a richer experience. And just think about, where is my light coming from? Because when you're outside, you've got one really big strong light source, the sun. But when you're inside, you can have a variety of different light sources. You can have different light temperatures reflecting off of things. And sometimes it's discordant and it doesn't look good, and you want to control that a little bit. But other times it adds for a really interesting, complex look that is kind of fun. Like, I love that little almost like crown of shadow that shadow and distortion I have on the right side there. I definitely wanted to keep that. So I had to make sure that light source was also affecting other areas in my still life. So, and that will also keep your still lifes looking kind of fresh and having a little bit of variety in there. Because if you had a bunch of little pomegranate seeds and they all had a reflection at 2 o'clock on the, the upper right hand side of each little seed perfectly, then it's going to get kind of repetitive and boring. But if you've got a few different light sources, different facets of the seeds are catching the light, you're seeing a little more rhythm, a little bit more interest. It could just make your picture more interesting. So, but that is something that you are only going to really understand by observing. Our brain would tell us we have one light source, we'll make all our light sources agree, and that is definitely a safe way to go. And if you're drawing from your imagination, that's probably the way to go. But if you have the chance to draw something from a still life that you've set up yourself, you can decide. You can turn lights on. You can turn lights off. You can bring a lamp closer. You can control, to an extent, your environment and see what you think. Why does it look better if I have this light on versus that light on? Why, how come I like it? I like this still life here, but I didn't like it in the other room. It's probably your lighting, and that's something that you can really play with and have fun with. You also need to pay attention to the subtleties between the shades of color. So with the pomegranate, there are so many different shades of red, but there's red that's got like ultramarine mixed in it that makes a really, really deep, deep purple. There's red that's got yellow ochre mixed into it, which makes kind of like a muddy brownish orange color. You've got all these different varieties of reds, from deep, dark burgundies to pink to, you know, rich ruby reds, and you want to make sure that you take advantage of that full spectrum of color. I also wanted to mention that this painting is 11 inches by 14 inches. I painted on a canvas panel because I personally prefer to paint on canvas panels over stretch canvases, but that's complete personal preference. And it took me almost 2.5 hours to paint. So I just wanted to make sure I got that info out so you wouldn't be sitting down and expecting to paint it in half an hour. Maybe you can, but I certainly couldn't. And like I mentioned before, it's really important to make sure you get the colors of your background in your transparent objects. So I did go in and add some of that yellow, buttery yellow color to the back of the glass. And I did it in a couple strokes to make it look like you had kind of had that fluting on the side of the glass. That little cup is so pretty. I'm sure I'm going to use that in other still lifes because it's just so dainty and delicate. And I know I don't quite have the shape right, so I'm definitely going to want to take another crack at it. We actually have a set of 8 of these, I think. So it'll be really fun to use in upcoming still lifes. And if you can, just go ahead and get your highlights on something and have it pretty much done, go ahead and do that. If you feel like you can't get your white to stick, then wait, because crimson is one of those faster drying oil paint colors. So if you give it overnight, it'll set up enough you can paint over it. For some reason, it seems like more transparent oil paints dry quicker than your more opaque oil paints. So colors like titanium white, that's a very slow drying color. Yellow ochre, very slow drying color. Burnt umber, pretty slow drying color. Ultramarine blue, fairly slow drying color. It seems to be the more opaque a color is, the more it's going to take longer to dry. Or if it's like a mineral based paint, like yellow ochre, which is an iron oxide, or burnt umber, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, which is a mineral, those colors seem to dry a lot slower, where really transparent, almost dye-based colors like your crimsons and your phthalos, those colors, and your quinacridones seem to dry quicker. And I just think it's because they must need to add more oil to mill down those heavy earth mineral pigments to make them smooth. That's the only thing I can think of. They must contain much more oil than, say a crimson. Must not need as much to to emulsify it or whatever. But that's something that I've noticed, and that's something you could take advantage of when you are painting. I'm sure there are some earth tones that dry a little bit quicker, probably more transparent ones, because I know a lot of people do their underpainting with thin down, like burnt umber, or thin down, burnt sienna, but that's what I've noticed anyway with oil paints. But the nice thing about that is with all those red areas, if you want to let them set up overnight, you could go in the next day and get those highlights to stick. So don't get frustrated. Don't, pull your hair out. Just take a break if you need to take a break. The painting itself, I would definitely, I won't be handling it too much for about a week. That'll be about touch dry, and I still don't varnish for 6 months. You can use a, what's it called? There is I think it's called a retouch varnish you can use to varnish it early if you want to. But I don't. I usually wait the 6 months and then varnish it. If I sell it before then and it's dry, I instruct the client to varnish it at 6 months. But you can do what you do what you want to do. Now here I'm using some white to add in the pithy areas of the large pomegranate that is sliced in half. And that white is very cool on its own, so I probably will need to go in there and warm it up a bit with some yellow ochre, although there are some really cool areas, like the membranes between the sections of the pomegranate are very cool in undertone, whereas the skin, like the large pith, I guess that'd be more of the pith. The membranes that divide up the sections of seeds is cool in undertone, but the pith itself is very warm in undertone. So it's got like those yellow ochre brown tones, and it actually is very porous and it will stain easily from the seed juice, whereas the membranes between the seeds do not stain with the seed juice. So so you want to kind of pay attention to those little subtle nuances of warm and cool temperatures to get as much variety and color as you can in the pomegranate, because you've got so much red, and red is such a dominant color. It's very overpowering, and it can be difficult to get a lot of contrast and variety in a shade of red. So definitely exploit all of those undertones, all of those different shades you see, and you can even exaggerate them a little bit if you want to make them really make enough variety so you can tell the difference between different sections. I did go in and add a little bit of a detailing around the plate. It's kind of like a gold foil type design or gold plate design around the edge, but it's been worn because it's a very old plate. So I did kind of make sure it was really kind of shabby looking, so it didn't so it wasn't like a perfect repeating pattern there. For the knife handle, I mixed some crimson with some yellow to kind of make it a little bit warmer in temperature. If you've seen any of my quarantine still life paintings, you probably recognize this knife. I've got a set of 6 and they're all different like colored handles. And I just really love the way they look in still lifes. I'm not sure why. They're just the cheapest little knives that I got at like Ocean State Job Lot in a set. But I think those little steak knives work so well in still lifes, and I use them quite a bit. And we actually use them in our kitchen quite a bit too. I'm going ahead and adding this kind of gray tone that I made with burnt umber and ultramarine blue. I'm putting it in fairly dark, and I find with oil paints that if you put in your darker color and then you add white to it, it's really easy to lighten up a color with white, but it's really hard to get your dark values back if you've got white there, because as we mentioned before, white dries very slowly. So if you do need to paint over something and you've got white there, you're going to have to wait, or you're going to be making mud. So it's much easier to put that darker value in and then add the white to go in and highlight. And I'm putting the rivets here, and I realized, I got the rivets really unbalanced. They should be equally spaced apart. So I had to wipe out that middle one and then put it back in again. So there, I thought I was going to be real clever, put the middle one in first and then put the 2 side ones out, and then it would be easier to balance it, but clearly that didn't help. But luckily, oil paint is extremely forgivable, and you can just wipe something out and start again. Wipe something out and start again. I think that's my oil painting motto. Wipe it out, start again. Wipe it out and start again. It's like the painting has an undo button. We were just talking about that last Sketchbook Sunday. I think I was saying, I wish I had an undo button. Well, now I do. It's called painting with oils. And it doesn't matter if you want to use water-mixable oils like I'm using, or you want to use traditional oils, because they work exactly the same way. The only difference is instead of adding some mineral spirits to thin down the paint in those early layers, I'm using water, and very little, not even a lot. You can use your traditional mediums with water mixable oils, but you can't use that much of them. You got to keep the amount small. But I have to say, I did try adding some of the slow dry gel, and because I was using the water too, it just wasn't working. So I would experiment a little bit, maybe swatch some stuff out and see how it works, and maybe see how the film holds up. But you can. I honestly don't use a lot of mediums. If I'm using traditional oils and I'm doing a piece that I'm going to be layering, then I'll use some mineral spirits on the lower layers, and I'll use some linseed oil on the upper layers. But I keep it pretty simple. I do with my watercolors as well. I'm not a big medium person, but it depends on the effects you're going for, obviously. Now I'm adding highlights here. I'm trying to think if I have let this dry overnight at this point. I think I have, because those highlights are sticking really well. I took a break. My eyes were really tired because I'd spent a couple hours painting, and I let it dry overnight, and that was enough to let that red set up so I could go in and add those little sparkly highlights on it. And then I could also add some highlights to the plate, because even though it's a white plate, you're still going to see brighter white highlights. And I wanted to have some of those on the edge and in the middle of the plate where the light would be catching, like the lip of the plate and any like divots and whatnot. So it definitely is a lot easier if you just let that set up a little bit. And remember, you can always let it sit for a week and come back and alter things and tweak things. So don't feel like you have to rush it or make it done in a fast in a matter of time. And this painting, actually there's 8 parts to this tutorial over in Critique Club. It's about 2.5 hours long, so if you want to parse this out over a couple weeks, you can. I put 2 long tutorials every month in Critique Club, so you can work on a little bit more advanced projects while having somebody, you know, talking you through it every step of the way. And I put that out there because I know a lot of people want that advanced content. They don't necessarily want to submit their own work for critique, but they like being part of the community and having those longer tutorials. So I love that I can make that accessible to more people that want that sort of thing. And there is a place for you to upload your artwork if you're doing one of these tutorials for feedback, or if you get stuck or whatnot. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll put a link to that in case you are interested. So at this point, I'm just refining, I'm tweaking shadow, I am adding, I decided I wanted to add a few of the little seeds on the table because I had scattered a few on the table when I was setting up the still life, and I like the way it looked, and I feel like it adds a little bit of rhythm and repetition that enhances it. And I also put a little bit of juice and pulp on the knife itself just to kind of tie that in with the still life a little bit more. And I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. It was really a lot of fun to paint. And it's because it's such a slow process, you really kind of get, you know, you kind of zen out a little bit, and it's honestly really nice to have a painting going that you can come back to the next day. I used to do that a lot when I had my studio downtown. I'd have a big oil painting I'd be working on, and then I'd be working on it over the course of weeks, and it was just really nice to have something going, to not have to think up a new idea every single day, to just come in and work on a project. So consider that if you're thinking about getting into oils or maybe doing a larger painting. It may feel overwhelming, but the fact that you don't have to think up something new to paint every day, you come in and you can work on that same project is really nice. So anything is easy if you take it step by step. Anything can be broken down into easier, manageable chunks. So if there's something you want to paint, just go for it. Paint it. You can do it. It might take longer. It doesn't mean it's harder. Sometimes things just take longer time to do, and you're worth investing that time in. You're worth building those skills, and it's worth it to have a hobby you enjoy, and to spend your time the way it's meaningful for you. So anyway, that's pretty much it for today. I'm just kind of tweaking shadows and kind of puttering around a little bit. I needed a little more shadow on the plate underneath that little chunk of seeds. And I usually do a final shadow adjustment at the end because things change, your color saturation changes, which might affect your values and whatnot. So you kind of need to do a final pass with your shadows and your highlights at the end just to make sure that they're intense enough, which I did here. And I'm pretty happy with it. Like I said, this is a very puttery piece, and I ended up kind of dabbing here and dabbing there and adjusting, but I'm really happy with the way that it came out, and I hope you enjoyed this project too. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked this project, and thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting!